Esther and to explain it to her, and he told him to instruct her to go to the king's presence to beg for mercy and to plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days has passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he went back with this answer: "Do not think, because you are in the king's house, you are alone of all the Jews who will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position in such a time as this."
All of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, the Lord our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This morning, I want to welcome those here in the church. It's great to see you all. I want to welcome those online. Hello to you, those that will watch this later. We've heard together as we worship with us all across the world. Konnichiwa, buenos dias, or to you here today. As we're here, I want to start our time together in the sermon with a poem called Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit, from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am master of my fate. I am captain of my soul. It's a wonderful poem by William Ernst Henley. And if you're here today and you happen to be a valedictorian, think about using this poem instead of The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Be original for a minute, because I hear that one all the time at those wonderful graduation speeches. But what a wonderful poem it is. And as we're here today, I think that poem really kind of separates a little bit of life from us, is that there's kind of two ways of going through life. There is the way of life of going through, of being beaten up and giving in. There's a way of life of going on through it, being beaten up and saying, no. You don't have the final say. I still have something to do in this world. As we know, God holds us in his hands in so many powerful ways, and God controls our destiny in so many ways, and God can speak and change history at any moment. But yet it is true that there's some responsibility on our shoulders as well. And that's what I claim in this poem, not that we are captain of our souls beyond God's control, but that we are captain in what God has given us control, which is quite a bit. As we're here today, we're actually in the final of the Underdogs series. Yes! Yeah! Oh, that's right. Oh, boo! It's rubbish. So as we're here today, we're going to be finishing this up, and it's been a lot of fun for me. As you can tell, I enjoy sports quite a bit. In fact, I'll just tell you a little bit. I may be a little sleepy here today because yesterday there was the game of the day, which was not the game I thought it was going to be, my Georgia Bulldog game. It was not the Ohio State game. It was Washington State versus UCLA. I got caught into this, and it was 2:30 a.m. before it ended in regulation, not even overtime, 67-63. The losing quarterback had 9 touchdowns, and they still lost. All right? I mean, it was crazy. Anyways, but I am a sports fan, as you can tell, and we've been talking about different sports moments, but I wanted to take you one that really goes beyond sports. It is sports related, but really goes beyond. And in fact, this poem is also the name of a more recent movie called Invictus. It's got Morgan Freeman in it. It's got Matt Damon in it. It's actually a really great movie, and it tells a story of when sports become more than sports. You want to go back to 1994 in South Africa. Nelson Mandela, it was the end of apartheid. Nelson Mandela is released from prison, becomes president of the country. filled with hate, filled with racism, filled with scared Afrikaners who were the white people who had been kind of the minority but had held all the control. And all of a sudden, more Native Africans held the control. And what was going to happen? The country itself was on the brink of civil war. There were militants that were heavily armed. People wondered if the military itself would hold a mutiny. People were afraid of losing jobs, of their farms. They were afraid of losing their anthem, their flag, even their lives. And the country never went to a civil war. In fact, it tells the story of this movie Invictus so powerfully. And I would probably tell you today that even though Miracle is my favorite because it has hockey and it's just a great moment, but truly probably the most deep sports movie of all is Invictus. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and go find it. It's Morgan Freeman's best role he ever did. It's absolutely amazing. But there was this fear of this country on the brink. And because the end of apartheid had happened, they were suddenly able to play international sports again. They'd had a ban on South Africa until that time. And people loved rugby, especially the Afrikaners. It was their sport. They loved rugby. And so it became an issue of, well, does this rugby team, who only the Afrikaners liked and everybody else voted or would cheer for the opposite teams, are they going to strip the colors? Are they going to strip the symbols? Are they going to change the name? All these different things go on just to be symbols of the end of apartheid. That's what it was associated with. And Nelson Mandela did what he did so well of coming to love other people. He'd been in jail for 27 years. In a jail cell that if you took probably some of these benches and just made it a cube, you could reach out and touch the cell walls where he slept. He sat there day after day pounding rock into gravel on a desolate island off of Cape Town for 27 years. And when he came out, his message was forgiveness. His message was, this is not a revolution. If it is, it's one unlike any other in the sense that it's going to be a revolution of forgiveness, of people coming back together and building a country with every brick that is available, no matter what color wraps around them. And so eventually, he did this most preciously with the team, the rugby team, the Springboks, as they're called, and he kept their colors, he kept their symbol. He was booed and booed and booed until the rugby team aspired to do something great. And in fact, they were hosting the World Cup that year, and so the World Cup came. They didn't play so well. They weren't that great because, again, in the international play, they had been banned, and so they weren't exactly up to their teams that they played against. And yet they played, and they kept eventually winning. And they got a free buy-in because they were hosting the World Cup, so they get a free kind of into the World Cup, and they played, and they ended up winning it all. And the country that was afraid, you can just imagine the stadium filled with a bunch of Afrikaners, these white descended colonialists who were afraid of civil war, ready for the brink of disaster. And the whole rest of the country that started chanting for South Africa because it became their team. From the moment, I just read actually the captain, Francois Pinard, some of his memoirs the other day, and he was talking in an interview about how he remembers the country would boo him. But on that day, where it was the World Cup final, Nelson Mandela came out. He wore basically the symbol of apartheid on it. And that green and yellow with the symbol Springbok on there with the hat on. And when he came out, the people that were afraid of him, people that put him down, started chanting, Nelson, 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 Nelson. And that day, he had been voted in president, but that day he became the president of all the people in South Africa, united a country in ways, and sports can do that, has some power to do that in ways bigger and beyond what it originally was supposed to do, just being entertainment. You never saw it, go see it. Much better than I even can tell you, and that poem is spread throughout that movie. And when you watch it, you can't help but get to the end of it and see Jesus just written all over the movie, left and right, every single way you look. Jesus can take broken lives, bring them together, and do amazing things. Well, in our story, Esther comes from the book of Esther, And I'm not going to tell you the whole story here today because I want you to go home and read the rest of it if you never have. Not that long of a book. You can go and read it in one sitting. But I want to take you to the point of where we're at in this story, where a woman is asked to save a people and prevent civil war. And it's a story of Esther, who is a Jew, who has a cousin named Mordecai. Her parents had died. Mordecai took it upon himself to raise her up. They're living in Persia, in Susa specifically, and the capital city of Persia at the time. So this is actually after all the other stories we've told. This is right before the Greeks come and conquer the world, if you will. The Persians are the dominant military power in the world. They are, the big dominant force. And the Jews that have been taken to Babylon are now in Persia, hanging out, waiting for the redemption of their land and to return home. And Esther is, by fortuitous kind of circumstances, is brought into the king's court. King gets out with his queen wife, and so kind of shoos her away, and they bring in sort of all sorts of beautiful women from all over the place. No one knows her background. They bring her into the courts, and she is one of the favorites of the king. You fast forward the story is these other Jews were trying to live faithfully, the normal Jews out there, including Mordecai. And of course, in a world of great power, there are people that abuse it. And so there's a guy named Haman that comes along that doesn't like the Jews, but specifically wants to show how great he is. He gets power from the king. He starts showing it around. In fact, he forces people, when he walks up to the city gates, they're supposed to bow down, give him reverence, and to show him how great he was, and to show his power, and he loved it. And the Jews couldn't do it. And Mordecai couldn't do it. It drove Haman mad to the point where Haman devised a plan and heard who these Jews were, went to the king and got a royal edict to kill all the Jews in all the lands of Persia. Word gets back to Mordecai and the rest of the Jews. Of course, they mourn, they put on sackcloth, they do all the things you do when you come to God and with a broken heart and knowing the ante is so big and so huge. And Mordecai sends a note to Esther, as we read. And Mordecai says, hey, we're on the brink of disaster, basically, do something. And Esther, who's basically a queen at the moment, knows her life is in danger. She can't just go to the king. That's not how it worked back then. The king had to summon you in Persian culture, and if this king summoned you, if you showed up and the king didn't summon you, you were automatically going to be put to death unless the king extended his scepter and saved your life. And so Esther sends a note back saying, the king hasn't called to me in 30 days. I have no power. Mordecai sends a note back that we read just a minute ago. I want to read you those words once again. Esther's words were reported to Mordecai. He sent back an answer. Do not think that is, because you are the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, surely relief and deliverance from the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. One of the fun little kind of trivia games you can play is, there's some Bible trivia if you ever go play trivia anywhere. And one of the questions that's often asked, I'm going to give it to you so you can feel all cool, right? Is what book of the Bible doesn't mention the name of God anywhere in it? Esther. The book of Esther. And when you read it, that's kind of amazing. You kind of wonder, why is this in the Bible, right? And the answer is because God's in it, even though it doesn't name him. But all these circumstances that come about, and Mordecai really points to it right here. You have been put to this position. Esther, open your eyes. You may not feel powerful. You may not feel like you have the ability to save the world, but you have been placed for such time as this. Recognize the power that you have. Take a risk and do something about it. Fast forward the story, and I'm not going to tell you. You got to go home and read what happens if you haven't before. And if you get excited about that, you go home, you read, and you go, this book, this is just amazing. I didn't know such stories were in the Bible. Guess what? Disciple starts Wednesday. It's not too late. You can come join and be with us and actually go through the Bible and read all these stories and talk about them and develop and let them kind of just mold you and shape you and see what happens. But for such a time as this, you see, Esther had a choice. just like Nelson Mandela did. Live in the fear. She could do what she had the power to do and go to the king. It's great, that story of Invictus, because it shows how Nelson was actually, Mandela that is, was actually willing to not only separate, reach out to the Afrikaners, but even his own party. He did things that they didn't like, but he did them because he valued human life and he knew what the right way forward was. He held the country together that should have tore itself apart. It's interesting. I know many of you, it's that time again, 2020, Ohio, battleground state. Guess what? It's coming, right? The wonderful presidential election, right? And it's kind of interesting. I just want you to think with me for a minute about what's coming. Right? There's going to be all the attack ads. You know all that's going to happen. But something even more kind of insidious is going to happen. The candidates are going to try to get your votes, right? And they're going to try to do it whatever way they can. And one of the things they're going to tell you is this world is horrible. This country is horrible. I'm the one to fix it, right? And of course, that's how they get votes, right? And they're going to keep telling you all these different things, and they're going to tell you all these things, and they're going to try to get you riled up. But what's going to be interesting is many of them are not going to tell you this. You have power to change the world. I was reading a BBC article online this week about refrigerators. 2015, this article was from. It told a story about Santosh, I can't even pronounce it, but Chadway, I'm just going to guess, from Ramshapur, India, a little town, a village that is right outside Calcutta. 2015 is when the story was written. That community got its first refrigerator. He was the man to buy it and bring it home. Wanted to read how in that country, 3/4 of people do not have a refrigerator. Think about that for a minute. The poorest of our poor, unless they're homeless, have refrigerators for the most part, right? Don't be blindsided by what's coming, right? I know this world has problems. I know our country needs things, and we need to have those conversations, but don't be blindsided into forgetting the power that you have. In fact, if you look at the whole world, including developed nations, undeveloped nations, all these different things, 1/4 of the world doesn't have refrigerators. Our poorest of our poor who have refrigerators are by default more wealthy and have more power than 1/4 of the world, right? Just put that into perspective. It's insane if you think about it. And in fact, if you think about it, the blessings that we experience in the United States, many other people would sing praises to God every day. Is it perfect? No. But is it something to be thankful for? Absolutely. And the simple truth is many of us are going to be told, hey, you have no power. There's something wrong with this world, then you need to fight it, and we need to do it here in the United States. All these type of things. But I want to ask you the question, are you alive here today for such a time as this? Don't forget the power that you have. For oh, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am master of my fate. I am captain of my soul. Let us not forget that this world is unjust. People have power disproportionate, that's true. But let us not forget, God calls us in the midst of that. Use the power that we have to make a difference and to build the kingdom. Let us pray. Lord, as we're here today, we thank you so much for your love once again. We thank you so much for your scripture and this story of Esther, who reminds us that even someone as powerful as the queen can think of themselves as not powerful. And even someone as powerful as the queen can sit there and be tempted to sit and do nothing and to think, I can't change the world. And yet, Lord, through our hearts are spoken to you by your Spirit, that is. Just like Mordecai sends that letter. So often we would say to ourselves, we're not masters of our own soul. Other people determine who we are, what we can think of, what we can buy, what we can be. And yet, God, you ask us for such a time as this. Please, Lord, help us to take what power you have given us and and to use that not only to bless others, but to build your kingdom, and to do it in all the ways that glorify Jesus Christ. We pray all this in the holy and precious name. Amen.